What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to the Fireside Wisdom Podcast. I am Tim Bursons here with Paul Rickards and Trevor Rowe. This is our third episode. We are very excited to come back and bring you some more content, again, about life, consciousness, spirituality, wisdom. Today we're going to be talking a little bit about virtue, some of the things that I think that a lot of people are struggling with as far as understanding the way that life is working right now, especially with all the turmoil that's happening in the world. There can be a lot of confusion. And so we've been having some really good conversations. We really wanted to be able to share some of those conversations with you and also just explore deeper ourselves, because in these conversations, we all grow a little bit. We all discard what's not useful and we all obtain a little bit more that is useful, so that hopefully we can leave these conversations being a little better versions of ourselves than we were when we came into them. And same for you guys as well listening. We are so happy that you're tuning in and giving us the time of day. As you can see, we have our fire here ready to go. So we are holding true to the fireside aspect of the podcast for now anyway. We'll see how this pans out over time. Indeed. So, like I said, today's topic, we really wanted to talk a little bit about virtue and what that means, and sort of dive into that a little at a deeper level, so to really understand it. The Stoics really talked about virtue a lot. They mentioned a lot of different virtues that they saw as unanimous to the human experience, things that they thought that were true in every individual, that every individual could recognize virtue no matter where they were coming from, even if maybe on the surface people disagreed about how that virtue was expressed. They could still recognize that there was a truth that was underlying all of it. So, for example, I think courage is one of the greatest virtues, the willingness to face fear and move through it without collapsing, without falling into that negativity and letting whatever is causing the fear to take you over. And obviously that's the difference of then the absence of fear, right? The absence of fear is not the same as courage. The courage is in the face of that contrast, in the face of that resistance, you summon something deeper within you, that inspiration come up within you, the spirit comes up within you to face that challenge. So that's an example of something that would be virtue. And so I'm going to ask these guys in a second what virtues they maybe connect with and what they align with. But just to wrap up on the courage aspect, I think that's really the tipping point when it comes to a lot of inner growth, because it's very scary to look at some of the things that might be holding you back, or the parts of yourself that are unsavory, or that make you uncomfortable, or put you in a state that is hard to really understand. And so, like, the willingness and the courage to face those things is really, really important. So for me, courage is one of the most important virtues, in the sense of being able to really tip that scale away and start the growth process, put your foot in the door, and start that movement of energy. So, Paul, what do you think is one of the virtues that you align most strongly with?
That's a tough question.
It is, yeah. It's for me. There's a lot of different words that I could use, but the one that pops to mind right now is honor, and to do your life and your process and all of what we accumulate to ourselves and give in abundance, do it the honor and the justice, if you will, of the time that it needs and the time that you need to move forward in your life, and with integrity. And so I guess that's a couple different words. But I have an excerpt from a book that popped in my head when Tim brought up the subject. And it's a book by R.A. Salvatore. The book is called The Hidden Blade. And the excerpt is from the main character, Drist. And it says, "Virtue is absolute. It must be. Virtue is the celebration of life and of love, the acceptance of others, and the desire to grow toward goodness, toward a better place. It is the absence of pride and envy, the willingness to share our joys and to bask in the accomplishments of others. It is above justification, because it is what truly lies in each and every heart. If a person does an evil act, then let him weave his mask, but it will not hide the truth, the absolute, from what is naked within his own heart. There is a place within each of us where we cannot hide from the truth, where virtue sits as judge. To admit the truth of our actions is to go before that court where process is irrelevant. Good and evil are intense, and intent is without excuse." And I think that intention is a big part of understanding virtue. And Trevor, what do you think would be
that builds on our conversation about intention too? It builds on that the recognition that intention is important before any action or before anything is comes to fruition in the world. So yeah, sorry to cut you off, Trevor. But.
No, that's fine. And even before I answer, I just want to reply to that and say that, as you say, that is very stoic in nature, like very absolute, very devoid of feeling, but super rational, and it makes sense. Like that virtue is undeniable internally. And it reminds me of a conversation that this is unrelated, I had with my father one time, and he was expressing some dissatisfaction with his experience of his religion and the idea of forgiveness. And it's just something that sticks with me, but he was very bitter about how some criminals, like serial killers or really bad people, will go to jail and they will repent. And then all your sins are washed away when you repent. But you have to be true and honest about it. Like that's that inner virtuous judge. You can't get away from the consequences of your actions. But if you're sincere in your repentance, then, you should be forgiven. But I think that honesty is a virtue that I really like. Being truthful to others and with yourself. And to me, gratitude goes hand in hand with that. Just being realistic about what it is that you have in your life and trying to be thankful for that.
Yeah,
that's awesome.
I think honesty is a huge one, especially because dishonesty can work its way into your life in ways that can be very... deceiving because it's dishonest, right? But in a way that makes it very hard for you to even recognize that you are being dishonest, which again goes back to having the courage to be able to look at the parts of yourself that are unsavory, parts of yourself of where you're being dishonest, that maybe, if you hold yourself in regards as a honest person and you say, oh, I always speak my mind to people and I always want to make sure that whatever is true is what I say. Well, then if you go to a situation where maybe you're nervous about how this person is perceiving you, and so you're trying to put on air a little bit, or you're trying to make sure you say the right thing so that they'll see you in a certain way, that is an example of being dishonest. That's because you're manipulating the situation. You're not just being honestly who you are or being openly expressing the fact that this is where you are. You know what I mean? There's a little bit of this, a minor deception, a very minor deception. So when you think dishonest, you think maybe like big corporations and like greed and people who are like straight up lying, but a very intrusive one is I think it is the reason that people suffer from things like social anxieties or shyness or something like that, is because there is a low level of dishonesty that comes from an insecurity.
Yeah.
A need to be dishonest because of the insecurity to put on a fake face, which goes back to the mask conversation that we talked about, in episode 2, I think it was. Yeah.
And people will do that. They'll spend time fabricating and personifying this fakeness, as a way to kind of cope with things in life in general and interactions and so on. I think one of the biggest drawbacks for me as a young man, and I think in my early 20s, is when I really started to explore the concepts of virtues and what virtues I wanted to hold for myself in my life, and had long since forgotten about these things, you know what I mean? It just became part of who I was, and I didn't think about it anymore, and I think that's the goal. Like, we want to find and allocate those things in our life in a way that they become just so integral to who we are that, it's just honesty all the time. Like, I couldn't possibly think about being any other way because this is my practice. Like, you use the word dharma all the time. Like, this is the thing I say to myself. This is the personification of all the hard work happening manifest. And I want to always strive to explore new virtues and to become more aligned with those things so that I can be a happier, more well-rounded individual. But, weaving of the mask, right? Like the creation of like that safe place, that place where we can kind of hide from the world and maybe manifest those unsavory things behind the scenes. And what that little excerpt I talked about says, that it's virtue's absolute. Like, you can weave the mask, but those things will come to light. The truth will come to light about who you are. So how long do we want to spend, working on, not necessarily working on, but allowing ourselves to go to those negative places and not find health and not find peace and truth? That's the journey's different for everybody.
I think in the same way that, if we stick to our virtues, they work for us and it becomes part of who you are. If you cheat yourself of your virtue, then that bad habit also becomes part of who you are.
Yeah.
And then that's what Tim was talking about earlier, where it's insidious because you become blind to it. It's just working against you. And when you face the truth, it's undeniable. Like, you'll know. You can't lie to yourself about it.
Yeah.
But at the same time, why do so many people get caught up in these things that they think that they need to be that are not virtuous deeply.
I think it's people are just a little void of what that means. You know, they might not understand what virtue is. They might not really know in their heart of hearts what they're trying to be or who they are deep inside. There's a go on.
I don't think that we make it about virtue. I think that a lot of times people get polarized and we make the values a big deal. Like, I'm going to judge you based on your values and what you put priority on.
Yeah.
But we don't talk about the manifestation of virtue in our behaviors, and that's really what is valuable.
Yeah. So then that would be the example of embodiment.
Right.
So when you were reading that excerpt, there was a call to the living of the virtue.
Yes.
And that it's not just about the words. It's not just about what you say you believe. It's about what you do. And I think especially at the beginning of the pandemic, this was a big thing. Was on social media, there was a lot of, what was later titled virtue signaling, which was basically people coming to a place of wanting to act virtuous by saying that they were, defending something or standing up for some movement or whatever it was, without actually embodying those virtues. It was sort of like a cheap way of getting that little ego boost of having other people see you in a certain way. But true virtue is not necessarily tied to the content on the external level. It's more about that level that exists beneath it, which is, where are your actions coming from? Where do they spring forth from? Are they coming from a place of courage and authenticity and willingness and openness to grow? Because if they are, then of course the outer manifestation is going to end up being something that is beautiful, right? Mm-hmm. Something that people can recognize and will gain attention and popularity because it is something that is true, right? And that's where we think that, or how I started the podcast about, like, everyone can recognize virtue. And that was in the excerpt as well. Everyone can recognize virtue. Yeah. And so there is an attraction to that when it's coming from an authentic place, because the eventual manifestation of truly embodied virtue will always be something that is worth, I want to say beautiful or aesthetic or whatever, but what I really mean that, I mean like from the actions will speak for themselves, but it comes first from that inner place. And so trying to short circuit the process by getting that external trapping without having the underlying necessary framework and fundamental embodiment it's you see through it. You see through the weakness, to quote again from that.
And I think it speaks to levels of accountability, and how people are able to speak their truth, be the thing that they want to be, and honestly, and try to escape the trap of easy justification for wrongdoing. And it's a big thing in life. And I was talking a little bit before about, being a younger man and getting into like just cycles of bad habits and bad attitude and poor speech and, treating myself poorly, and eventually that bleeds into everything. Your work suffers, your friendships, your love, your everything suffers. You don't have appreciation and gratitude, and it's easy to justify bad behavior when we can say, well, that's what I know, that's what I've been shown, that's what life has afforded me, this, and then blame everything else instead of looking inward and saying, no, this is my choice. I made this decision. I've chose to be this unrefined and weak individual, for lack of a better term.
So as you say that, the virtue of responsibility comes to mind.
Responsibility, yes.
Because there is a necessary need to take responsibility for yourself and for your actions.
Yes.
So think about, there's a lot of verbiage that we use that actually is very deep and philosophical, but it blows right past us because we don't actually pay attention to it. We kind of take it for granted. So one of those phrases is to own up to something. So think about that verbiage. You're owning something. You're owning up to something. You're increasing your value, moving up in virtue by owning the thing that you did that maybe was not right. And so you own up to it, take responsibility for it, and in doing so, you're actually increasing your power, even though on the egoic level, there's this fear that people will now see you as the one who did something wrong and look down on you. But the true virtue lies underneath of that. The true virtue is that you took that courageous step of owning up to it, and that's respectable. That gives you a deeper power than to be the weasel, right? The weasel out of it and just sort of like try to worm your way out of actually just owning up to it. And I think that's
I can't stand people who do that.
It's a necessary aspect of virtue, yeah, or of that virtue.
Equally usable in those moments is the recognition of what somebody's putting on. and
Yeah.
trying hard to not be so critical and judgmental and just, I know that that's not something that you do. I know it's not something you do, but it's hard for me sometimes when I see people doing that. I'm really adverse to it because I recognize myself in that. And there's a mirror happening there where there was a time when I was that person. And there's some days where it's, so it gets blinded, not necessarily blurred so much, but it's easy to think about the ways that we used to be and to, in some capacity, identify with that. And there's that self-deprecating thing where it's like, well, that's, the ego tells you in some way, like, oh, that's still you. You can still, be that, unsavory individual. You can be that weak person who's not honest and who wants to get over and, wants to try to like sneak around and be that way. But it's like, it's after years and years of work, it gets to the point where your mind is just like, oh, come on. You know who you are. Like, don't be that guy. Like, that's old shit.
And I think
don't dig it up.
That speaks to forgiveness.
Sure.
And forgiveness, as you mentioned earlier, I feel like that is a virtue in itself. Now, of course, there's authentic forgiveness and there's also inauthentic forgiveness. Mm-hmm. Just like there is what we just talked about, weaseling out of something to try to look good or saying that you support something just because that's going to give you a certain number of points in the eyes of other people without actually embodying it.
The momentary gain.
So the criminal who, says, oh, I repent and then I get to go do whatever they want. It's like, well, first of all, they're sowing their own seeds, right? They're going to sleep in their own bed. They're like, even if externally society allows them to get out and do whatever, they're still going to be living in that paradigm of the world that they view, which is, a painful place to be, to believe that it's all power and you have to take from others in order to survive, or that others are, measly pawns to be stolen from. That's a miserable existence, right? So in and of itself, there's always this sort of natural consequence that the world has set up. There is, how would you say it, like existential
determinism.
No, not determinism, but like an even existential justice, or maybe like divine justice. Like that no one gets away with anything. Ever.
No,
the way that
never.
you choose to conduct yourself is going to manifest back onto you.
Exactly.
Yeah,
But
if
that
you treat
speaks to
other people as pawns,
Sure.
that's what you're going to be.
Exactly.
Absolutely. It speaks to what you just said about, not owning up to things. The person hasn't taken responsibility for their actions in a way that affords them the opportunity to truly repent for it. And it's an internal thing. And it turns into an external thing by the work being done. They've said, okay, I've done this thing. That is certainly something that I paid for, I'm accountable to, but I am not defined by that thing. This is who I want to be, thereby seeking the knowledge for its own sake, seeking the virtues that they want, and then practicing those things every day, and it becomes who you are. And people see that. Miles away, they see it. Somebody who's confident and standing on their own 2 feet, and they're like, oh, there's gravity there. There's light there. They've done the work. I can see
power,
that person who maybe had made some mistakes, but that's not their whole life, and they've become this other thing. And man, good for them. That's great. Like, how do I get that? Well, it's like, maybe it has nothing to do with them. It has everything to do with the journey inward. And I think so many people are so afraid to go inside and look around. And, like we talk about pulling all the closet, the skeletons out of the closet and like having a look at them, seeing what's useful and what's not useful and doing the work.
I think there's something actually more beneficial or more valuable in that experience of having been through maybe an unsavory phase and then coming out of it and deciding, right, versus someone who maybe was always in that and they never did anything.
Sure.
And so this is almost the story of the prodigal son, right? The fact that he left, now when he comes back, he can actually appreciate the gifts of the father more than he could have if he was there the entire time.
Sure.
And so I think that as humanity, we're all sort of on that journey. We've all come into this existence in a way that you can't come into this existence without some sort of, I'm not going to use the word sin, but I will say that is where the religious connotation comes from, is that the sin is to miss the mark, right? The reason that we're all here is that there is some sort of karma to be worked out. Mm-hmm. There's some sort of lesson or something that needs to be learned, and that's why we are here. Right. And of course, this depends on your individual religious or philosophical take, but I'm just going to continue with this because I think that even if you don't believe in karma or past lives or sin or any of those sort of things, that there's still valuable nuggets to be pulled out of this. Mm-hmm. And that is that each person has that experience of the prodigal son, where we have left that blissful state, that Garden of Eden, and come into this existence that has suffering so that we can grow through it and come back to who we really are. And in that leaving and coming back, we can truly appreciate that garden. We can really appreciate the garden because we lost it. And if we had never lost it, we would never really appreciate it in the same way. So it's almost a necessary step of the evolution of our
And
consciousness.
embodying virtue is in itself a religion of truth, isn't it? You know, it can be looked upon that way if it makes sense for people. Obviously, I use the word religion very loosely because that looks different for everybody. But there is a level of that where it becomes like a religion. You know, you pray to the God of honesty. You pray to the God of accountability. You pray to the winds, man, to give me the air I breathe. You know what I mean? And trust
Absolutely.
that it's there. And you wake up in the morning and you look in the mirror and you look at yourself and can you trust yourself enough to stand and be firm in your virtues? It's hard. It's really, really hard, and it's scary.
When the world tests you and comes knocking at your door,
Absolutely.
what do? That is the manifestation of your true beliefs. You can say everything that you want to say, but when it knocks on your door, what do? That's the question.
When the wolves are out the door.
Yeah.
I get it,
Yeah.
man. I get it.
So, for a lot of the things that we talk about, I think that maybe your everyday person who's not thinking at a higher level might miss the mark a little bit. But on this topic, everyone immediately can detect virtue when it is present. And so my question is, how do we recognize it? How do we enforce virtue in ourselves? And as much as authenticity itself is a virtue, is that the core virtue that we should be striving for? Because if you're authentic and you really live as yourself, then you can be said to be doing the work and approaching your virtues.
Would you
at
agree
least.
that embodying virtue, that when you are truly embodying virtue, that authenticity is almost inevitable?
It's like required.
Of course.
Right.
Yeah, so it might be a precondition, but I don't think that it's necessarily the core virtue. And the reason is that you could be someone who believes themselves to just be, this is who I am, this, like I steal from people. That's just who I am. And so I'm authentic about it. Yeah, I tell people like I just steal about people. You're being authentic in the sense of that's who you are, but that's not virtue.
Yeah.
And everyone knows that that's not virtue.
Right.
Because it doesn't support the unity of people. It doesn't support like the higher structure. So one example of this would be, to look at different clans of primates, different tribes of primates. And this applies to humans in a myriad of ways. But there are different, I guess I'm going to use the word tribes. So there's different tribes of apes that have a leader who is just bigger and tougher than everyone else and will just beat you up if you don't follow what he wants to do. And then there are tribes that are more collective and they share. And there's clearly still a dominance hierarchy. There's still the top monkey, but he rules out of love versus ruling out of fear. Well, the monkey who rules out of fear, as soon as he shows weakness, the other monkeys are going to jump on him and tear him apart, and a new leader is going to come out. And the tribe is in this constant state of, where am I in this hierarchy, like constant power struggle. That's all that matters. There's no connection between the tribe, no love. It's literally all about power. On the other hand, the monkey who rules out of love, if he shows weakness, no one wants to attack him because he's ruling from a way more aligned place that he cares for other people. And
Yes.
I think care and love are similar virtues in that sense. And so I think all virtues speak to that sort of willing or care for others and the collective of wanting good for all versus just the power struggle. And I think when we look at specifically the dichotomy or the duality between love and power, we can see that power without love is evil, and love without power is weakness. So you do need power and love both in order to truly manifest
Are
goodness.
you forgetting one, Tim? What's the third one?
Wisdom.
That's right.
Of course.
The old Triforce.
The old Triforce.
And I totally agree with you, and I love that. And I think that when you break it down like that, no one reasonable is going to ask why. It's very obvious why, when you build a hierarchy like that, you reap what you sow. If you
Right.
sow fear, then you are going to be attacked when you're weak. But if you sow love, then you're going to be cared for when you need.
I think that to quote another anime too, we said this the other day. We were chatting, just having drinks, whatever. It was from strength learn gentleness. Through gentleness, strength prevails, and it is very much like the
like that.
interconnecting web of things. You know what I mean? You can't have one truly without the other if you expect to succeed in a community. If you expect to succeed with yourself in the long term. Now, strength by itself gets you so far.
Short term.
Short term.
Short term it does, because you in that situation you can still rise to power if you want to go that route.
Right.
But the question I think that everyone should ask is, what is real success? is success just the accumulation of power, which could come in money,
Buddy.
could come in
Buddy,
Is that
let's
success?
go. Let's do it.
Well,
Come
because
on,
then you
tell
can
me
turn
about
and very easily actualize the things that you want to do, which could be regarded as successful.
the question is that the world you want to live in? And
Not
so
if
do you-
it's absent of virtue.
Do you want to rule hell, or would you rather abide in heaven? And that's the question. So it's like there's this dichotomy between fear and love, and where I speak dualistically a lot of times because I think the separation between the two polarities gives us the map to work within. And so when we look at the extremes, it helps to understand. It helps to understand the territory. And so in that understanding, even if you were to rule in love, you would have to embody virtue. No one's going in a love collective system. You wouldn't rise to the top of power unless you actually embodied those virtues. But at the same time, you wouldn't lord over other people with your power, and so people would want you to be at the top because they would feel that you expressed the virtue of leadership in the way that they wanted to have as their leader. But in the same sense, when your power starts to dwindle and wane, you would also give up that power when it's necessary. Now, of course, there's
You would
intricacies
think
here,
so.
a lot of intricacies here that we can talk about, but that might also express as the good ruler who turns evil, or the mad king, right, who flips and becomes the one who was initially good but then turned into wanting power and abusing.
Can we agree then in those moments that virtue kind of sits as judge for those moments where if you're not truly aligned with your virtues and you are the one that becomes corrupted, we would hope that in that moment you had built such a strong community around you that there would be others to be able to help pull you back from that precipice, to be able to say, hey, listen, I see what you're doing. We love you. We don't want this for you. Can you come back? Can you come back and be the one we need? Because we all need each other.
Mm-hmm.
I need you, and I need you to be your most authentic, beautiful selves. Because without you, then I'm sorely diminished in my life. And that's the honest truth.
Wow, thank you, Paul.
No, I mean,
And in the way that
that's the honest truth. Like, having you in my life has increased my capacities, has increased my bubble, has increased so many things for me. Just to be able to sit here and have this. All of the work had been done leading me to this point. It makes perfect sense why I would be here. Because I've done the work, and you've done the work, and here we are doing the work together.
It's the natural coalescing of energies.
It's beautiful.
That happens from
It's amazing.
that kind of thing.
And it's attainable. I feel it. I see it. It's happening. It's manifest.
To go in that direction, because I think for our audience, we have a very, very close relationship, and these guys are my best friends. I have never had such a trustworthy group of close friends as this one, and I feel the same way. We've been put in each other's lives for a reason. We are very different people, different backgrounds, different ages, and we learn so much from each other. And I look out into the world and I wonder, what is lacking, what is missing in other people's experiences that we are having here?
Certainly community. Certainly.
Yeah. And in the virtuous sense, the only thing, because this is a podcast and we want to pick on the rhetoric a little bit, I wouldn't say that virtue is the judge, but virtues are the anchor points by which we make our judgments.
Sure.
If you're aligned
It's
and
a
you
better
can
way of saying it.
see the virtues, then you will be a good judge.
Yeah.
And-
We'd hope so, right? And I
Yeah.
think that's a definite better way of putting it. I guess we could pick that apart, and we're going to probably do so, but I feel, for me, having only really known true virtue for maybe a decade in my life and understanding what it's meant for me, I know that they're all...
I think I disagree with the last decade. I think that you knew virtue before. Maybe it didn't express that way, but from your story, which I know that everyone listening does not necessarily know, but
Right.
I would say that you knew virtue, but that doesn't discount the possibility of knowing virtue and still deciding differently.
I'll use a different term then. I'll
Seconded.
say maybe not knowing virtue so much as not having the courage to seek virtue for its own sake, for myself.
For its own sake.
For its own
For
sake.
its own sake. And
Yeah.
that's a big one, yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's a better way of putting it, right? Thank you
Yeah,
for,
of course.
helping me reiterate that. But I don't know, man. I wonder...
Well, and think about that. Seeking virtue for any other reason than its own sake is
Would be-
non-virtuous, right?
Exactly.
It's non-integrous. So it short-circuits itself. It's almost the law of backwards, right? So if a bad situation comes along and you accept it, it becomes a good situation.
Yeah.
if a good situation is there and you cling to it, that becomes a bad situation. And so it's like the willingness to release that attachment. That's like the backwards law. So the want for virtue, or the need to express virtue for some sort of gain other than virtue,
Sure.
is non-virtuous.
Which
And
lacks
of course,
appreciation.
you're getting the cart before the horse. Of course, it's not going to work out the way that you want it to, even if you dupe the people around you to believe that you are virtuous because of the way that you're expressing like you're doing it in a way that makes other people think like, okay, like you're virtuous, but really, like, if they were to be radically honest with themselves, which is I think one of the main virtues, radical honesty with yourself and with everyone, they would know, like, yeah, they're not really, like, maybe I'm believing that because they're putting on this convincing act, but you could tell when a person is not really being virtuous.
Absolutely.
So,
I agree with that. And how do we manage those moments when we're trying to stay aligned with our virtues and, we're meeting resistance? I think that it's, I don't know, like, maybe it's not contextual in this moment, but I do feel like there's times where I feel like I want to, like, just grab somebody by the ears and be like, you're fucking better than that. You deserve better. You need to treat yourself better. And it's not my responsibility to do that, but it's so hard to see good people suffer unnecessarily. And I see that with my family. I have a very interesting family dynamic. I love my family, but there's moments when it's like, man, I use this expression. I talked about this recently, and I feel like this in society sometimes and with other people. Like, I'm pretty much an introverted dude. Like, I don't really seek out friendships and relationships. They kind of happen organically, which I think is the best way for that to occur. But with my family, speaking on virtues, there's a real they're not disaligned or unaligned with virtue. It's just that ours are so very different sometimes, and I feel like a ship moving away from a really tiny island, and I look back off the stern, and that's my family way out there, and I'm just going the other direction, and there's nothing I can do. And it's kind of scary because you're going to lose things along the way. You're going to have things leave you in life, and I think that's a beautiful part of it. And I would stress to anybody listening to not fear those things, and just accept it as it happens, and do your best and do your due diligence to say, hey, the door's open. If you want to be here with me in my life, like, this is my life, this is where I'm going, and I want you here. And that might not work for other people, and just be gentle with yourself and them in that moment and say, hey, that's your journey. I love you, but I'm going this way.
So that is the opportunity in your situation. In that situation, that is the opportunity to practice allowing and holding space.
It's like a release, right?
So allowing people to walk their journey, even if that they're doing something that's going to be bad for them or that's going to hurt them. Mm-hmm. That doesn't mean that you withdraw help. Of course, you always offer your help freely,
as long as it makes sense.
But you can't as long as it makes sense. That's what I mean. You freely offer it, but you're not attached to the outcome about whether anyone takes it.
Sure.
Right.
And that takes a certain amount of, I don't want to say detachment, but I like the term non-attachment, because it's not, attachment and detachment is the polarity of being attached or being closed off. Non-attachment allows both of those things to exist at the same time. There's a recognition that, of course, you want the best for them, but you will not control them. That is, you respect their freedom and their individual personal sovereignty to the point that you will offer anything that you can to them to help them with complete detachment from the outcome. And so the practice in those situations where you want to grab someone and say, like, why aren't you being better themselves? There's twofold here. One is to allow them to be as they are and recognize that they might have a different journey than you. Maybe they're here for different lessons and they have different karma to work out. Maybe that's why,
that is my lesson that I'm supposed to learn from them.
Right, exactly. Yeah. And that's the second part. So you're kind of getting in front of me a little bit.
Sorry.
No, you're good. Yeah.
Just how our conversation.
It's also, not to stop you, but it's also me recognizing that whatever I'm doing, whatever I'm feeling and thinking, is not so great. I shouldn't take it so seriously and so highly that I assume that it's for everybody. You know what I mean? And I'm not saying that not to diminish anything that I'm feeling, but it's certainly an individual thing where it's like, okay, this is for me, that's great. That's for you, that's great. And to be able to work that balance, to try to do that dance.
Trusting your own experience and trusting your own reality is super important.
Yeah.
But you could trust your own experience to the point that you're closed to any growth or newness.
Yeah.
And you can also not trust your own experience where you're completely open to everything that you don't trust your own experience. So there's these weird lines that we walk where the Buddhists talk about walking the razor's edge. And the way that I really view that is not finding the middle. The Buddha called it the middle way. He talked about that his path was the middle way. It's not pure hedonism and it's not pure asceticism. You know what I mean? Like the two polarities of pure pleasure or complete denial of pleasure. It's the middle road. But the way that has made the most sense for me is that it's not truly the middle in the sense that you're balancing the two polarities. It's that you're owning both polarities completely and transcending them to the point where balance, of course, is going to happen because you have completely owned both of those polarities.
Yeah.
So it's sort of like, and I don't know enough about cars to know if this is exactly maybe you guys can correct me on this, if this analogy works or not. But so there's an idea that there's front wheel drive where 100% of the power is in the front of the tires, rear wheel drive, 100% of the power is in the rear tires, all wheel drive, which is 50 in the front and 50% in the back, and then four wheel drive, which is 100% in the front and 100% in the back. So the idea being that there's a greater amount of power from four-wheel drive than there is from all-wheel drive. You're taking both polarities and lighting them up to the biggest, and the balance between them is going to be very natural. Maybe that doesn't actually work from a sense of
pretty close.
It's kind of close.
but I think that describes the analogy of what I'm trying to get across. You know, whether or not that works in the physical automobile world or not doesn't really matter. That the analogy there is what I'm trying to get at. Yeah.
Sure.
We can roll with that analogy for sure. I mean, say, my
Roll with
transfer
it?
case.
We can roll with
We
it?
can roll, yeah.
You got a real nice chassis, bro.
Yeah, but my transfer case is a little lacking. I drive a Honda.
We need to upgrade that differential.
So
What's your gear ratio, man?
4 to 3. What's yours?
Oh, God.
Well, so for all-wheel drive cars, there's a transfer casing somewhere that directs a certain part of the power to the front axle and a certain amount of power to the rear axle. And so some, like Jeeps are really, Jeeps and Subarus, for example, they have very balanced all-wheel drive. But on a Honda, for example, like it's heavy front-wheel drive and then a little less in the rear. But it's more balanced than not. So everybody's going to have their own experience. And I think that maybe a task-oriented person, for example, listening to this would have a good understanding of what we're talking about. But a goal-oriented person might be a little challenged here in this topic because we talk about not holding on to the outcome, not prioritizing the outcome, but prioritizing the work that you put into it.
I think that it begs, that particular thing speaks to the differences in people in general, where there's people that are in this world to achieve certain things, and they're holding different virtues than all of us, where we have like the maxim of our virtue is like these specific things, and their maxim is a different thing, and or things, whatever. But I often find lately where I've been trying to understand the difference between conceptualizers and doers, and we talked a little bit about that.
Yes, we did.
Whereas there's people that are a good balance of those, which are, kind of everyone here, we flow back and forth between those energies. Some of us hold a little bit more of the conceptualizer, some of us hold a little bit more of the doer, and they balance each other out, where I'm trying to figure out like the middle way.
Try to guess who's who.
Yeah, exactly.
In a more broad sense, my question for you is, it just slipped my mind. Keep going.
You're good.
Roll
You're
on.
good, man. You're good. I want to be more of a conceptualizer. I want to learn how to spend more time thinking ahead in my life. I'm very much a person who lives in the now. I'm very aware of how I feel today in the moment, and I'm really good at not manipulating, but I guess manipulating is a good word to use, like myself into the places where I need to be in the moment. And I am a very passionate person. I like to feel things more than I like to think about them. And those two kind of coincide with each other. But what I mean by thinking is in an absence of emotion, and leading more with passion than rationale at occasion. And it can kind of serve me well depending on the moment. But lately it's been more like, okay, like I want to think more about this and feel less about it and see where it lands. And see if I can build a construct around an idea and then become the doer in that moment after I've conceptualized and build the own design of my life instead of maybe seeking out concepts and experimenting with them. And I want to develop my own concepts, and I think you could probably
again on that topic. I think this is sort of like how to think.
Yeah, right.
And it doesn't mean that in a content base about how to think, like like indoctrination. It's not about that.
Sure.
It's about how to think as far as like how to use the instrument of mind or mind body in the most effective way. And so the conversation of the connection between emotions and thoughts have to be a part of that conversation, because we actually do use emotions more in our thinking than a lot of people realize. So if you wanted to take if you're angry, right, you're holding the energy of anger, you could rationalize an angry world, and you could look out and see an angry world, come up with philosophies that are based in anger, and make perfect rational sense about why everything is anger based. You could do the same thing with fear and why we live in a fearful world, or grief and say we live in a sad world. Everyone loses everything and we're all going to die, right? That's sad. Yeah. And you can create entire philosophies around that.
Even to go further than you can, people do.
And people do.
That is how people view the world.
Of course, exactly.
I spent a long time of my life in anger, so I can speak to that and recognize how effective of a human I was in certain instances using anger as a motivational tool. It was kind of a really unhealthy pattern, but it also, the side of me that was leaning more towards the need for virtues and love in my life was the thing that allowed me to kind of shift my anger into a motivational thing. And it was like, I know I'm angry, and I am angry at those things, and I don't want to be those things. So how do I get through this? Well, that's where I want to be. So let me kind of work toward that, but still, like, anger is the only thing I feel, so I'm going to use that, you know? And then finding peace later in some capacity, it felt really awkward, and it's just like, oh man, like, I feel soft, I don't feel good, like, this isn't me, like, I'm volatile, like, I'm a force of an individual. Yeah, it's too much, it's like, way too much, it's like, man, like a big cloud all the time, and everywhere I went, everybody was like, damn, Paul gets it done, but Jesus, man, you can't work with him. He's a fucking tyrant, you know what I mean? And nowadays it's more aligned with, like, okay, how do we feel now? And taking other people's opinions into consideration and really listening.
But again, so there's two things there. The first one being that if you are living in that anger philosophy, you can use it to create things out externally that are, powerful for you, or not powerful for you, but that, like, maybe desires that you want to get, right?
Yeah.
You can get them. The question is that real success if you're living in anger all the time?
There you go.
So that's the first thing. The second thing is that you can use anger to move up in the emotions. There might be parts of sometimes where you want to collapse into depression or sadness, and instead you're like, no, I'm going to use my anger to stay in that higher, more empowered energy field of anger. So there's a walking that can happen that works with using emotions to move up that scale, right? To move up and increase your energy.
Yes.
And so I think that, again, like we talked about in the last episode, anger is not necessarily a bad thing. The question is, where are you coming from? Are you coming from a disempowered, like, sad, depressed state that you need anger in order to raise you up and hold self-worth for yourself and to say that I'm going to get this done because of it? Or are you coming from a place of, like, love and collapsing downward into anger, because that's a step backwards, right? And so you don't want to go in that way. And another aspect of this that I think is really important too is that while I'm talking about the emotions and moving up, like, that emotional scale, doing things in the world can give you permission to feel a different way. And so sometimes it is important to do those things so that you can, like, for example, if you wanted to feel like a more powerful person, you could do that entirely internally. It's entirely possible to be entirely internal, and then it would naturally leak out and manifest as a more powerful person outside of yourself. But if you're feeling disempowered, maybe you go do something that doesn't feel in the moment like you want to do it, but you do it, and afterwards you feel powerful because of it. And that's giving you permission to now feel more powerful. Mm-hmm. And so in that sense, like, you're allowing your emotions to move forward, you're allowing your energy to expand, but you're not, the important part that I think that is mechanistically important to understand, but also, like, just from understanding the field that we're working with, is not to get hung up on the external thing giving you permission, but instead recognizing that you changed your energy, and that's why things are continuing to evolve for you, because you changed your energy. Mm-hmm. So that can be a useful tool, but don't get hung up on that. You know what I mean? The inner reality is what's important.
I'm with you. I have something to add, but I feel like Trevor's wanting to chime in on that.
Even though the circumstances might affect you, you determine your circumstances. So
and your perception of the circumstances, the way that they fall into the story that you're telling or the context that you're applying to them. Mm-hmm. Again, the worst situation in someone's life might be the greatest gift they've ever had. So it's important to recognize that.
Sure. And I know that living in anger, for me, was like chastising myself. You know what I mean? Paying the penance of the years spent in squalor and years spent in just doing things that weren't really me. You know what I mean? Just kind of living the life of, oh, well, that's the way they're doing it. Well, that must be the way I'm supposed to be doing it. And, alcoholism, 2 packs a day, working 90 hours or whatever a week, just overabundance and things. And that was the cycle that I was in. And in recognizing at the end of that time of my life that it was as low as I could probably go. And the realizations that happened in the months after, getting sober and, working a different job and just following a different path, that so many things happened quickly and illuminated me to just infinite possibilities. It was like, you're reborn in a sense, and that's me taking responsibility for myself, right? This the self-care that needed to happen, that I was just such a neglected thing, such a hurt little kid that needed so much love from myself that I just wasn't giving him.
Yeah.
And it's a really beautiful journey. I'm sure we'll get into it some days, but I mean, it was beautiful for me. It's beautiful for me. It's what I needed.
Well, I think people do need to hear like a personal example of those kinds of things, because it helps people realize that they're not alone. And we're all going through inner battles that no one else sees, really. You know what I mean?
Sure.
And so to hear someone else's story is a little bit liberating in the sense that it gives them permission to feel what they need to feel. And I think that's what that's the biggest thing that we're all doing. We're denying ourselves from feeling what we need to feel, because we think that we shouldn't be, or we discount it. And when we have some sort of path carved out for us, some sort of example to follow, it allows us to give ourselves permission to do that which we already know is the correct path, but we are afraid to follow. You know what I mean?
For sure, absolutely. I mean, the goals for a person who's becoming, and I do believe that that's true of all of us. Ascending, becoming, whatever you want to say, we're all moving in a direction sometimes that might not seem so clear, but there is an honest move toward truth and goodness always. And I want that for my life. I want that for our lives, and I think that we all can get behind the concept of growth for its own sake, and true introspection, honesty, freedom.
And when I hear that, and when I think about growth, especially through the hard times, because growth is not always pretty. Like the aftermath, when you hear a story of someone who went through turmoil or something and came out of it, and
changed a lot,
and they changed a lot. And you're like, oh, you're the hero now. You went through it. That's awesome. But then the nitty gritty of going through that experience is not always smooth, and it's not always pretty. But a virtue that maybe I would say is fundamental, or at least I want to say is fundamental in my life, is commitment and dedication to the process, to the journey, to the growth.
Oh, yes.
And that means that no matter the depth of a depression that might come on, where I can't even feel the commitment, right? I can't feel it. I will mentally stay and say, I know that this is part of it. And no matter how bad it gets, I know that this is part of it, and I'm going to hold to that no matter what. That virtue for me, I think, is one of the most important ones, because it ensures forward progress, no matter what. Commitment to the process, commitment to the journey, no matter how bad it gets. If the commitment to that intention of moving forward is there, then it doesn't matter. Whatever happens doesn't matter. You're going to get there.
Let me restate that just from my understanding. You're saying that the commitment to feeling what you need to feel and going through each step and accepting what's happening to you is part of your total amount of growth.
I maybe wouldn't say commitment in that way, but that is part of it. But commitment to, I want to say commitment to transcendence, or commitment to releasing the emotional baggage or emotional conditioning, releasing who I think I am,
right,
so that I can be who I really am.
Not in terms of the outcome, but in terms of the practice.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Commitment to that, no matter how rough it gets in the weeds.
There's a wonderful vein of courage and bravery in that, because that's what that takes. All of this, all of what we're talking about is, if you're feeling like you can't muster courage and you're just at that low point where you're afraid, that fear that comes with that, it's like, that would be the bottom for me. That would be the beginning of the end of somebody like myself, my personality. Whereas I'm a little bit of a masochist in that regard, where I kind of look for hard things, and I kind of look for that in my life. Like, give me your worst universe. I'm fucking ready. I want
beginning of the end for you or your personality?
Well, I think with the construct of my ego.
Yeah.
And I think that's the key point. Is like, I've developed that part of me really acutely, and it sits pretty heavy in my personality, where I'm like, wanting things to go bad almost because I need a reason to do the things that I've learned how to do. You know what I mean? There's like wonderful. You know what I mean? You get
Can confirm.
Okay.
I hear you, Paul.
But I also
know you do that.
I enjoy a good struggle. I enjoy a good fight. You know what I mean?
Give it to me. Give me your worst.
Give it all to me, man. Let's go.
Because I can handle it, and you can.
But I would be lying if I said, in the hardest and the easiest of those moments, I'm always afraid. Always afraid. And I think that if I didn't voice that, it would be a lie, because there's many things in my life that I love and I hold on to dearly that would really hurt me if they went away. But I also know that that's part of it too in the journey, that those things may in fact go away.
Courage is not the absence of fear, but the strength to stand up in the face of it.
Tilt. You gotta tilt.
And that's
Tilting
I think that's
means something very different.
that's
to
the
me.
expression.
Tilt into it.
That's the expression of virtue. I think that is the expression of virtue is always, and strength. You could say strength is a virtue, right? So
Sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
where does strength come from? It comes from that willingness to have those experiences
Right,
that
it's
build you up, that
intrinsic.
make you stronger. If
The
you didn't
will to
have those
act.
experiences, you would not be as strong as you would be.
Mm-hmm.
You have to have some sort of resistance in your life in order to show you who you are. If you never had that, you would never know who you are, right? It's like the Abrahamic story of in the Bible where Abraham was in the tent, didn't really, or even the prodigal son. We can go back to that. You know what I mean? Like, you don't have the experience to show you who you really are when the going gets tough, when fate comes knocking at the door, life comes knocking at your door. Who are you? What do you embody? Who are you really? And we're all going to make mistakes. When that turmoil situation comes along and we don't act the way that we think that we would act, right? We have these preconceived notions about we say these things. Oh, we are this and we are that. And then the moment comes, do we act that way or not?
And that's when you find out.
And A, that's when you find out. And B, that we're having many versions of that all the time in our lives. You're going to fail. You're going to see yourself not doing the thing that you think you would do in that situation. And the longer you condemn yourself, you're creating a greater disparity between who you think you are, who you're saying that you are, and who you really are. And that is what the gap that needs to be closed, I think, between all of us. And the way that you do that is to allow yourself the failure and forgive yourself for the failure.
It's so interesting you bring that up, because there's been hard times, and even recently in the last years, where it's so funny you bring that up, because I will literally be in the mirror and I will ask myself, who are you? If things are hard right now, who are you? Are you that guy that wants to go sit on the couch and play video games and fuck off and forget his responsibilities? No, that's not you. It's easy to fall into that trap if you want.
Mm-hmm.
And there's plenty of things that'll help you along the way if that's the way you want to go, but that's not who you are. It's not who you want to be. Go do the hard thing, because that's where you're made. That's how you're going to make your bones. That's how you're going to forge yourself into the person that you can look at in the mirror, and you know who you are. And when you do that, it's like the lights come on, man. When you go do the hard thing, man, that even if you fail, you still have to try. And if you fail, all right, what did you learn? And if you learned, you haven't failed.
Exactly. That's what we talked about.
I know who I am. I'm old Greg.
Thank you. Bring attention.
Bring it down.
We'll leave you all with
A little bit.
one last analogy, or one last image that I think is you speak to right there. Is there's a statue. I actually want to get this for my desk. It's a pilar of rock, and out of it is a man chipping
Chiseling
himself. He's the self-made man. And I think that is, this applies to men or women. Obviously, this is something that is universal to the human spirit, which is creating yourself, looking in the mirror and seeing that you are actually the embodiment of the virtue that you say that you hold. And you're not just virtue signaling, and you're not just putting it out there as something to get the trappings, the external egoic trappings of approval and, the accolades and all of that stuff, but that you are actually embodying that.
Yeah.
And that you are being that.
I dig it, man.
Yeah.
I love that. I get it.
And
chip away the rough edges. One
chip
little
away the
piece
rough
at a time,
Exactly.
man.
And hey, guess what? Carving yourself
it's
out hurts.
painful.
It's painful.
Yes.
It's painful.
It's painful.
And that is the Talos principle. That is, Talos said, you cannot remake yourself, or man cannot remake himself without suffering, for he is both marble and the sculptor.
Yes.
And that is the point.
Beautiful.
And it's not to say that if you don't like the way the sculpture looks when it's finished, you could break it all the way down, add water, turn it into mortar, and create another one for yourself. But I love that.
And we're doing that on micro and macro levels to ad infinitum. It's the beautiful tapestry that is the world. If you don't like what you paint over it,
Absolutely.
It's beautiful. Thank you all for tuning in. We appreciate all of you for listening, and hopefully you got a lot out of that. I am Tim Bursons. This is Paul Rickards and Trevor Rowe. This is Fireside Wisdom Episode 3. We are so happy that you're here. If you're watching this on YouTube or on a podcast platform, please subscribe and hit the like button if you enjoyed what you heard. Definitely share this with anyone that you think might get value out of it. And please leave comments, because we want to have a discussion about it, and we want to be able to continue to connect with the audience and maybe get some content ideas for future episodes and things like that. We appreciate all of you so much. Please have a wonderful rest of your day or night whenever you happen to be listening to this. We will talk to you again soon. Peace.
Ciao.
Much love.
I would love